you want to know before you're there in the moment. Hi Foxley. Bye Foxley. What the heck is an amp? What if you want to figure out how many amps, volts, or watts something is? Why does this even matter to me? Hi everyone, welcome back to another tiny house centered video, and today I wanted to touch on a comment that I get most often, which is people wondering how we're able to run so many electrical things at once in our tiny house. They've seen my vlogs and we've got the dishwasher running, a couple appliances in the kitchen, maybe the washing machine, plus the lights, everything going on. They're like, how are you not tripping your breaker? So I want to touch on that and then a couple other electrical tips that I've learned along the way since being in a tiny house now. And honestly, I'm also surprised that we can run so many things on our setup. We are in a 50 amp tiny house, but we're utilizing a 30 amp pedestal out back. So for all intents and purposes, we are in a 30 amp tiny house, and we've only tripped the breaker once, and that was because we used to have a space heater which used so much power, and at one point it ended up tripping our breaker. Before I mention everything that we have plugged into the house or things that are often plugged into our tiny house, I want to mention two things. First off, electrical items and appliances aren't always using their max amount of watts that they have available to them the entire time they're plugged in and the entire time they're being used. A second thing is your breaker isn't going to trip unless if it's been sustaining a bit too much power for a long period of time, or if you have a spike in your power usage that goes way too high all of a sudden and then it needs to trip it. For example, when we had our space heater going, it was going for a decent amount of time, everything was fine, granted it was using a lot of power, but the thing that really did us over was the refrigerator that is always plugged in, always getting power, but every once in a while you can kind of hear the refrigerator ramp up and it's using a bit more power to get it back to its status quo or whatever, and that ramp up of power is what caused our breaker to trip. And even though it was essentially due to the space heater being on, in the end it really was the refrigerator that tripped it. There's some things that we have constantly plugged in and that are for the most part always drawing power. Let me cheat and look at my little list. We've got our vacuum, 2 pet feeders, a pet water fountain, 2 mini fans to help combat condensation, air filter. I have my heated coffee mug that is never far from sight, and that's always sitting on its charger in the kitchen when not in use. Our heated pet bed. We of course have the lights always going in the house. Our Mr. Cool heating system is always running, whether it's heating, cooling, or on dry mode. I do have our bathroom fan turned off at the moment, but that is also often running, I don't know, sometimes half of the day. We have a wireless charger set up for our phones, refrigerator, the kitty litter box, which is, yes, electrical. It is the litter robot, our Arlo security system, hub, and then our internet. Those things are always running. And then things that we've added on top of that all at once, we've had the TV going, me walking on the walking pad, a couple appliances going in the kitchen, whether it's the Instant Pot and the air fryer at the same time, the washing machine going, and the dishwasher going. So to me, that's a lot. That's a lot more than I expected would be able to run through a 30 amp. Alright, so let's break this down a little bit more. What the heck is an amp? An amp is a unit of electrical current. Then I'm going to give you 2 more definitions that you didn't even ask for, but that we're going to use. Watts are a unit of power, and volts measure electrical potential in between 2 points. And since we're using all of this information in reference to tiny houses and RVs, let's say, how do you find out if your tiny house or RV is 30 amp or 50 amp? Well, first of all, of course, you can ask your builder or ask the person that you bought it from, because that should be easy information they can just give to you. But if you are physically looking at your tiny house setup, you can go out to where you would plug in your electrical, and if it's a 3-prong plug that's sticking out at you, then you're going to be on a 30 amp system, which is also 120 volts. Now, if you see 4 prongs sticking out at you, then you are on a 50 amp system with 240 volts. I want to have a little asterisk on the side with this, a little caveat, because This is true 9 out of 10 times with the, even more than that, 9.5 out of 10 times with how many prongs versus how many amps and stuff it's going to be. We've discovered that some weird plugs get made. Honestly, when you're out there looking at different plugs, they make a little bit of everything. So this is 9.5 times out of 10 that it's going to line up for you this way, but that is one way that you can figure it out by physically looking at your tiny house. So this will become a little more relevant in a minute, but just bear with me. Let's say, what if you want to figure out how many amps, volts, or watts something is? How do you even figure that out? Thank goodness there is a very easy math equation. Amps times volts equals watts. And if you think about it in that order, it is an alphabetical order, just to help you out a little bit. You got A, V, W. Amps times volts equals watts. So, because we know that, you can also say that volts equals watts divided by amps, and amps equals watts divided by volts. An electrical product that you buy is always going to tell you how many amps or watts something has. And if it doesn't mention volts, you can easily look up the volts. But for the most part, anything that you're buying, any typical electrical item that's going in your house, it's going to be 120 volts. They have cords that are the 2-prong system, or even if it's grounded. I know that looks like 3 prongs, but still most likely going to be 120 volts, unless if you start getting into the really big appliances or really big tools that are needing a lot more power, then you're going to jump into the 240 volt range. So with the equation that I just mentioned of amps times volts equals watts, you can plug in the numbers that we were just mentioning and see how that all works out. So you've got a 50 amp system times 240 volts is going to equal 12,000 watts. So now you know, for the most part, being in a 50 amp system, that you've got approximately 12,000 watts to work with. And then if you were on a 30 amp system times 120 volts, then you're 3,600 watts. Okay, so you guys are like, why does this even matter to me? Why are you breaking this down for me right now? This matters for a few reasons. One, it's going to dictate where you can park your tiny house, what kind of system you need to have planned for your tiny house, or possibly just knowing that you need to then get an adapter, just things that you want to know before you're there in the moment doing it. Hi Foxley. Bye Foxley. This also dictates what type of appliances you can get to put inside of your tiny house. Because like I mentioned, once you start getting into the larger appliances, that's when you start messing with the 240 volts. And if your tiny house is wired for 120 volts, you simply cannot use that appliance in your tiny house or in your RV. So say that you know you have a 30 amp or a 50 amp tiny house being made for you. You know when you're out shopping for appliances that if you're going to have a 30 amp, you need to find appliances that are all 120. Or if you're going to have a 50 amp, that you are given now the availability to use appliances that are 240. Or say that you have your favorite brand of appliances and you really want to go with this brand and a lot of their products are 240 volts. Well, you want to make sure that you purchase or request to have made a 50 amp tiny house so that it can allow for those items to be put inside of it. A real life example of this is, as I've mentioned, technically we are in a 50 amp tiny house. Bobo. But our pedestal, where we are plugging into and getting our power from, is a 30 amp. We have an adapter. Everything in our tiny house works fantastically, except for our oven, because our oven is a 240 volt appliance. So it literally, it needs too much power that it cannot physically be used at all in our tiny house, because it's hardwired into the tiny. It's not like a plug that plugs in anywhere. So it's not even that we could just try using the oven and maybe it will pull too much power and then it would just trip the breaker. No, we simply cannot use it at all, which we have been able to make work. We just use our air fryer, we use other things, but when we are moving onto our property and we're building there, it's of course going to be on a 50 amp system. So at that point we'll be able to use the oven. Everything will be working as expected and as it was manufactured to be, but for the short time, that is what's going on. Another reason all of that information is really helpful in all of that math is maybe you're trying to figure out how many things you can fit and how many things you can run at the same time in your tiny house. And so you can literally map that all out yourself. And Jared did that when we moved in here and was figuring out what was too much. And we were a little nervous in the beginning, but after seeing the math and seeing how many things we could actually run on our system, we gained a lot more confidence. And then especially since living in it and only having it trip that once, extra confidence. So I know I've sort of already answered this question, but I did want to specifically note, so can you use a 30 amp system when you are a 50 amp tiny house, or vice versa? Can you use a 50 amp system when you are a 30 amp tiny house? Of course. Yes, obviously. That's what we're doing right now. So yes, you can completely do that. You just need to get an adapting cord to make sure that you can plug it in properly. You wouldn't be able to plug in a regular cord from a 30 amp to a 50 amp by itself. Like, that just wouldn't even work. You have to go out and get a cord. And I'm going to phone a friend to my hubby so he can give you a quick explanation of.
So cables are rated for the amount of electricity that they can safely transmit. You've got 50, 30, 15. If you already have a 30 amp cable, it can be tempting to go out and just buy the adapters you need to plug in that 30 amp cable to a 50 amp receptacle on your house or RV, and then a 50 amp pedestal to supply power. Now the problem with that is you've got 50 and 50 on both ends and a 30 amp cable, so there's nothing stopping from your house trying to pull 50 through that pedestal, and the cable is just, it's going to overheat and it can catch fire.
Thanks, bub. That is about the extent of my electrical knowledge that I've gained from living in a tiny house. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope that gives you a different perspective. Maybe you feel more comfortable being in a lower amp space now, knowing that so many things can run off of it. If you do have any other questions, feel free to let me know down below. I will do my best to answer them, probably grab my hubby to help me answer them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you want to see more content like this or vlogs in our tiny house, please like and subscribe. And I have videos coming out on Tuesdays and Fridays. Thank you guys again so much, and I will see you soon. Have a good day. Bye.